Hello, my name is Zizaran, coming to you live from Exilecon, and I'm joined here by Rory.
How's it going?
And Neon.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
Thanks so much for joining me here today.
No worries.
Yeah, thank you.
So the topic of this is going to be boss design, and I'm very, very excited to get into that. That's one of my favorite things about Path of Exile, and these are two of the people that are in charge of making bosses.
Yep, I've been working on bosses since Exilecon, and I think, what was your first boss? Probably balancing
I think my first boss was actually the OG Crematorium Megera with the ridiculous firestorms that killed me and probably many people.
So responsible for a lot of deaths then?
Yeah. I kind of said this a bit yesterday, but it's almost a point of pride to kill as many characters as I possibly can. So, sort of.
Have you ever seen a streamer die to like a boss where you feel like you had a big particular influence and just go like, got him?
Well, I've even been there on stream. I was on stream when I died myself several times to my own content. That was a way back. There was also times where I sent people into their demise. I convinced them that they can do the fight. They go in, they could not.
Nice. That must be a good feeling.
But yes, and I do see it. But there's also a downside to that, of course, as well, which is I also see streamers go in and completely trivialize that content, and it makes me feel a little bit sad inside. But there's normally a decent balance of deaths and trivialization. But yeah.
So I take it you're not a big fan of the recent trend of builds having 3 or 4 shapers per second in damage then?
No, I'm not. It's cool that it's gotten to that point. It's cool that players are capable of developing their characters to be so powerful, but I'm not a fan of seeing it, just completely make our content look like it's nothing, look boring, look uninteresting, when we do put a lot of work into some of this. So, and as I've said, this is something I'm very much hoping to start correcting in 3.9.0 and, of course, in Path of Exile 2.
Looking very much forward to it. The trailer looked amazing. The bosses look really hard. We'll go into that a little bit more later, and I haven't actually played 4.0 yet myself. I'm doing that later, but a lot of people have been telling me that some of the bosses are genuinely really hard, even early on, which is surprising. But one of the questions I wanted to start with is, do you both have a favorite boss in all of Path of Exile yourself?
I have fond memories of Exilecon just because it was the original, and it still holds up in some ways.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Generally, it's one of the last kind of set I've worked on, I'd say. I'd say I don't have one that holds, but I mean, a lot of them. My favorite is currently unreleased. I'm not going to say the name just because people might not want to hear it, but it's on my shirt if anyone wants to see it later.
Very much looking forward to that one.
Yeah.
And on the topic of boss design, where does it start? Like, for example, will someone like Chris say, we need a boss for this expansion, or we need a boss for this content, and then you guys come up with a theme, the abilities? Or do you sometimes just like stand in the shower and like, oh my God, I just have an amazing idea for a boss. What do you guys think of this?
Almost all of those ways at different times. I mean, one of the bosses for the 4.0 for Path of Exile 2 that you saw was something that we got the concept art, and it's very clear what's going on here, and the family need to be involved in the fight. I mean, his family, not your family as players. Yeah. And that the fight came from that, and it changed completely, but it was still like, that was the core of it. The concept art was the core of the whole encounter, while we've got other things that, well, the Shaper, for example, is kind of...
The Shaper has a, very unique story. Well, you actually started that process, I guess, so...
Yeah, I made a boss, and I said, can I have like a star texture on the boss and have like a scrolling star texture? And so we got the engineers to make something that would work with that. And then from that, we got a Frostbolt and Vortex, space art variation.
Celestial, yeah, that's made a lot of money now.
Yeah, and so from that, we the Celestial stuff looks cool, let's have something more with it. And it grew until within later on was like, okay, the final boss should use the same space stuff. And so the Shaper and a lot of his abilities came from, hey, the space stuff looks cool on this one boss.
Yeah, so the current laboratory map boss, the one that transfers between the two arenas and has all the portals, that was the inspiration for everything Celestial in the game.
Oh.
That is effectively the start and end point there. So that was a bit of a crazy process. But yeah, so sometimes you have, like Rory had a cool idea. He did it, him and an effects artist worked on this. That then turned into one of the most notable bosses, which is currently on Chris's shirt here. And will be one of the most notable bosses of all time. And of course, a large amount of monetization of Celestial microtransactions, which I do believe is a the most popular option for most players.
I would say so. Hopefully you got a race for that.
I should.
Okay, Chris, listen in. And like, while we're talking about Shaper, he is one of the most iconic moves, like the Shaper beam. I remember like seeing that for the first time, and it's like, boom, everybody goes like, wow, right? So what bosses in particular do you both, I feel that you worked on the most, and do they have any like particular skill like the Shaper beam that really stands out to you, that you really enjoyed?
Well, I think the Shaper beam was yours as well.
I think it started off as just Scorching Ray, and then they were like, no, we need to make it bigger. No, we need to make it bigger. And then it's like, okay, you can't dodge this if it's moving. We need to make it stationary. So,
I mean, a bit of our process there is we will we've got a meeting room, just a small room, single table, a couple of whiteboards. Me and Rory will just go in there. We know what we need to make by this point. We either have the art or don't, but we know we need to make this. So once we've gotten that information, we then go into the meeting room and we will just talk it out for a while, come up with ideas, come up with plans. Often it's difficult. It's getting more difficult now, that's for sure. After doing so many different mechanics, different ways of killing the players, it's difficult to come up with new ways, and it's also easy to overcomplicate them because we're always trying to make it better than the last. There's a few bosses, I guess, where they've got way too many skills than they need. The Shaper Guardians are a case where they actually have quite few. So. The Hydra's got a barrage, got a what we call doom arrow, which is the arrows coming from the ceiling in a straight line. You've got the forking shot, and then you've got Hydra turrets, and then a minion, very small minion phase periodically. And that's quite a small number. There's only like 5 mechanics there or so. And it works so well. Again, you can get the DPS to trivialize that currently, so it's not, too in a great state right now, but that could be said about the general balance of endgame and everything. So as it holds up, though, it's quite good. A lot of people died to it. It was difficult for a good amount of time. And then we see on the other side of the spectrum, and you see this with a bit of the synthesis and some of the others where they just have, you probably don't even know this, but they some of them have 20 skills, some of them have 10, 15 skills, and half the time they don't even get executed in the fight. So I guess this is something for 3.9.0 that I've been trying to do, is circle back, simplify a little bit, just realize that we kind of did creep the mechanics up a little bit much, and just go back to more simple. And Zeri is a good example of simple as well. Yeah. It may not come across like, I say simple and players might not think it's simple, but I just mean in terms of her rotation is quite, semi-deterministic. It's a good mechanical fight instead of, I guess, too much of a ruckus. So yes. As for back to the question of, I guess, my favorite.
Yeah.
One I worked on
Anything
the most.
that really stood out to you?
Well, I mean, I have to say Uber Elder is probably, one of them, even though it's combining, obviously, Shaper and Elder. I did a majority of the Elder fight. I wouldn't say from a design point of view, again, it's shared, but from a development and execution point of view, I did the majority of Elder, and I think I did the majority of Shaper. But then Uber Elder was intended to be a completely different fight. And I mean completely different. We had this big brain monster that had the Shaper mounted on the front of it, and the Elder was all part of it, and it had kind of these tentacle-like creatures that you can see in the fight, and they were meant to dismount and start doing mechanics like beams and then remount onto the brain spaceship, and we just never executed it. And we knew we needed an Uber Elder fight, and we were just like, we cannot make this fight work. I mean, there's a lot of tech and what we were at the time calling the mothership tech. It just wasn't really doable in the time frame, but we needed to give an Uber Elder fight. So we just took the Shaper, took the Elder, and kind of put them together. And I believe it really worked, but that was a cool case of just making a whole new fight, or what felt like a whole new fight with mechanics just out of two existing fights. So that's probably my favorite in the sense of how the development went, and of course where it sits in the game. Again, kind of gets trivialized, but it held its own for a good amount of time, except for, I guess, Righteous Fire against it. But
yeah, I've used that a lot for it. But I'd still say Uber Elder holds itself very well, and so does its Ziri. But particularly Uber Elder is something I want to talk about, because that changed a lot even from the trailer being released to actually release. Because for those of you who don't know, in the trailer of Uber Elder, we can see that Shaper has a bullet hell stage. And everybody, at least that does bosses a lot, like me, Dan, stuff like that, we were like, how are we going to do bullet hell and Uber Elder? That sounds very hard. So what was the thought process behind removing that, especially so late?
So, I mean, we obviously have to get a certain amount of, press coverage and trailers and whatnot out at a certain point in time. And often when that's the case, yes, these things are in development. So the trailer, sometimes we try not to, but yes, it has some stuff that's not true. I mean, we're doing trailers before we're doing alpha often, or at least at the same time, and so we do then at least take alpha feedback. Not that it's easy for alpha players to get to Uber Elder in the time frame they have, but so it could be internal as well. And in this case, we played it and we were like, this just isn't. There's no counterplay. I mean, in the Shaper fight, you rely on the Zana bubble, right? I mean, that's not there. It was just too difficult. It didn't feel fair. And I even mentioned to you this a little bit before, but that skill, sad to say, has a lot of desync. If you're not in the bubble, it's not like you can maneuver throughout those projectiles. You'll just die to some invisible... he teleports to one location on the client, teleports to a different location on the server. So all the projectiles you see are just a lie. It's not proud saying that, but it is a thing. I wish it wasn't, and we can fix it. But in this case, that combined with the fact it just felt unfair, even if it was working, it just wasn't fit for it. And the fight was definitely difficult enough and mechanical enough without it. So that was just playtesting. There were three of us mainly iterating on it, and we just decided it had to go.
That makes sense.
That may have been when the statement was said that no one had defeated it legitimately in the office. After removing that, maybe that wasn't. I can't remember the exact timing on that, but yeah.
It looks very hard. It's already a very hard fight for a lot of people. On software and stuff, you can go so heavy on damage, and then it becomes kind of trivial, but very few people still kill it on hardcore. So definitely it lasted the test of time, so to speak, which something you worked on a lot, you were saying was one of your favorites. Edziri, I'd say at least Uber Edziri, which is a harder version of the Edziri fight, still very hard today, and that's been out for 3-4 years now?
Yeah, it has had some numerical tweaks, but also it's got that sort of not super obvious full damage reflection that you can accidentally kill yourself on partway through, so...
Yeah, is it... I would say, for example, Shaper in particular, I would say is very trivialized now, whereas Uber Elder and Edziri is not. How much do you guys plan around making sure that it lasts for a long time and doesn't just get power creeped?
not really a core part of the plan, except for the sort of more recent in-game top-tier bosses. Like Etziri was, Etziri, the game was in a very different place. The damage that people could do was very different, and the builds people were doing is very different from what we have now. So it really is luck as much as anything else that it's actually lasted so well. And it's quite a simple fight in terms of the core mechanics, but it is a lot of damage that it dishes out. So it is a very mechanical fight in that if you know how to dodge it and you do pull that off, you can survive it. But it was never designed to be survivable, to take multiple hits no matter how strong you were. So.
And even today, that is very hard. Like the big yellow lightning things, they do a crazy amount of damage. So it's a very fun fight. But Etziri has a very special mechanic that I don't think we see anywhere else in the game, at least that I can think of, with the Etziri into Uber Etziri mechanic, where you get the mortal fragments to open up Uber Etziri. How do you guys personally like that mechanic, and is that something we can see more of in the future with the same boss, but maybe with just everything stronger and different loot?
It's definitely something that we should do more, considering it's not too challenging for us to implement other than just a bit of balance. But the Uber Elder was kind of originally conceived as this, except the same fragment system, or making it just a full, straight path from one to the other, wasn't really something we wanted to do for a core in-game experience, I think we could say.
Yeah, I would say that there is room to do that more. I was kind of talking to Rory about this briefly as well, and it is something we probably should do more, especially considering, and not to demean it, it is very cheap to do on our end. I mention a lot of the time about how stressed for time we are and how busy we are and how there's so much stuff we already can't do. But, maybe that's a good example that we should do a bit more of that and put our attentions in some other places. Of course, no promises, and it is relevant to the content. It is contextual. The story has to support it as well. There's a lot of other pieces, and of course we do need to still, at the end of the day, make all the items. We aren't going to just release it without the loot pool or the drop pool that comes with it. So there is still a bit of work there, but I would say yes, it would be, as soon as we can find a good opportunity to do it with new content, I'd like to just do it. It's I'd say successful so far. And of course, if people disagree with that, let me know.
I'm a very big fan of that, at least, but I'm sure there's going to be very mixed feelings on that. But you were talking about loot tables, and something I really want to talk about is divination cards, especially for boss uniques. How do you guys feel about a player being able to, especially through a card, for example, the Void, that can give you any divination card reward? So whenever somebody has bought a supporter pack for a Starforge, Void Forge, they could end up getting a boss drop just from handing in one divination card. How do you guys feel about that?
Well, I don't like it, personally. Again, it's not like just because I'm not a fan of it, we can just make this decision and have it happen. It's a team effort. We've got to bring it up, got to have the discussion, got to get all the opinions, got to get the community feedback and see where they sit. So there's a whole process there. But yes, personally, I'm not a fan. I actually saw this with the Reliquary as well. I mean, I know it's not divination card, but it's giving boss-only uniques well before the bosses are even encountered. I remember going on trade and seeing 30 presents of Chiolas that are all, the hologram, I can't remember the name, and then there's one presence of Chiola that legitimately dropped from Chiola. In fact, maybe that one was from a divination card as well. So there was a good 30 of the unique item, and Chiola possibly hadn't even been killed in the league at the time. And that really disappointed me. I would say if we're going to do that, at least the Reliquary part again, we're going to try and prevent that from happening. As for the div cards, I can't say whether or not we're going to do anything, but yeah, a personal opinion, I don't like seeing the boss uniques come from the divination cards, especially before the content has been encountered. I would say that later in the league, once they're quite, once they're all over, it's not so bad. But so maybe there is something we can even do there where they're not as available early. But again, it's all speculative. It's not for me to decide here and now. But yeah, not a fan.
It's definitely a problem that if you're killing random monsters, there's zero chance that you're going to get anything truly amazing. So it is a balance of making sure there's something great from just the stuff you're going to find in a regular rare map. But I would like to hope that there's plenty of stuff still to find while doing that.
Yeah.
Or hopefully we can improve the chance of you getting something awesome as you're going through that, in addition to still making these things that you want to do this specific content to get this awesome item.
And you guys have a very varied audience between like players who have played, 15 to 20,000 hours and players who are just starting out playing the game. Who is like the target player, especially for endgame boss fights? Like, who do you try to target for designing the bosses?
I mean, this is a hard one. This is still coming up now. Again, we're making new endgame bosses, and this question is just coming up a lot. We're having frequent discussions, even off the clock ones, amongst a whole bunch of staff members of just what to do here and who's it for, and it's so difficult to decide. Now, it's really easy on one end where, you're creating bosses very early in the game. It's pretty clear where they should be. The power differential and skill differential, well, skill less so, but power differential in between characters at level 10 is nothing like they could be at level 90 plus kind of terrain. So the early game bosses are generally a bit easier to make. We just pick a difficulty where we want it to be. I'd say, with Path of Exile 2, we're setting the standards a bit higher, and we'll probably continue to do so. 3.9.0 actually does include some updates to the campaign bosses, making them harder as well, especially less off the curve, I guess. There's some that have just abnormally high life and some that have abnormally low life. We're trying to standardize it a little bit, just so that one boss doesn't die in 1 second and another in a minute, or 5, or however long. But then you've got Uber Elder, which is, again, very easy. The target audience is the elite of the elite at the time. Again, very easy to pitch. But then let's say, Synthesis, which had the last set of bosses, Legion's a bit different, but say Synthesis, it was fully intended that a lot more people can do the Guardians, but the Cortex is, more towards the Uber Elder, set of difficulty. I guess the unfortunate there is it's far more RNG driven, so even the good players can't rely on finding it, which is also a bit of a shame in hindsight now. But yeah, I'd say it varies is the main point. There's no just fixed pointers. But look, we want everyone to be able to, who can get to it, to be able to at least do it several times, feel like they're making progress, feel like they're getting better, feel like they can eventually defeat it. Like, that's a good aspirational goal to have. But yes, there's no fixed point. It does vary.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of it is a mix between how hard the fight is to actually do if you know the fight well, and how hard the fight is to do if you don't know what's going on. And for the most advanced players who are the first to reach the encounter, then we can make sure that the fight is challenging, but that doesn't necessarily mean the fourth time they're doing it, it'll still be challenging for them, as they've figured out the easy to dodge but deadly stuff.
I definitely can relate to that, because I remember the first time I did Shaper, I was literally shaking, whereas, a few years in, you're like, okay, click, hey, loot. So it changes a lot when you are more comfortable with the fight. A lot of these fights, especially at Zeri and Shaper and stuff, they have phases. And we don't really see a lot of people complaining particularly about endgame bosses, but we do see a lot of people complaining about the Brine King and the Brine King boss in maps. How do you guys feel about the loot of those bosses not being maybe up to scratch for how long they take to kill, just because the players spend so much time waiting around?
Well, we've definitely made a shift to try and make sure our new bosses don't have invulnerability phases that you can't speed up in any way, or there's nothing to do during that stuff. It's obviously quite expensive to go back and change an existing boss in a major way, so it's not something we can shift back. And it's not the kind of thing that we're just going to say, well, for a player who can instantly remove the life bar of any enemy, we're not going to double the loot for the point of the time they've spent waiting for the invulnerability phase. But yeah, we're moving away from that as much as possible.
It's good to hear.
Yeah, for the Synthesis Guardians in particular, there was just a hard rule of no immunity phases. So we'll design them in a way. The minion phase was designed in a way where they couldn't be immune. Cortex had a little bit, but at least during that time, you've got busy work with ads, and we've been going back to a lot of bosses in maps, or no, I wouldn't say a lot actually. We've done less than we should have, but we have been going back to some map bosses and making sure that during those immunity phases we try and add as many monsters as possible that do give loot to compensate for the time. It's just a shame that the balance has gotten to this point, because when the immunity phases are 3 seconds out of minutes, it's different, but now it's 3 seconds and then 1 second of non-immunity, which is sad to see.
Awesome. Well, that was all the time we had. Thank you so much to both Rory and Neon for joining us here today. And thank you for the always beautiful chat and the audience. You guys are amazing. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having us, Liz.
Have a good one.